Will you? We have met before, haven't we?
We have,
yes.
indeed.
It's a small group today,
Yes,
isn't
yes,
it?
it's small.
But inshallah, it'll be all right.
Yeah.
There is another gentleman. Another? Yes?
Yeah.
Please be seated. Come here.
Yeah.
Let's start straight away. Huh?
Yes, we have got a small group today. They would like to ask certain questions. We have got our friend, our neighbor here. He has
Your
been
neighbor,
coming to
yes.
one of our meetings before.
MashaAllah. How close are you to the mosque come in? Huh?
150 yards.
Just that?
Yes,
Wow,
2
wow,
minutes.
it's almost next door neighbor. You know?
Indeed, we're very close.
Indeed, yes. Very good. Which direction?
Where I am now.
And as you go out
Is
to
the
the
bear
gate,
behind
walk.
us?
That's right, yes.
Yes, it's over there.
Oh, there. I know this is correct, quite right.
Start.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, Hazrat.
Assalaam.
I describe Ahmadi Muslims as passive Muslims because of the way they conduct their preaching and their jihad through word of mouth rather than...
What do you mean by passive?
Uh,
Pessimists.
no, passive.
But they are very active Muslims, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
But my question sort of comes and sort of relates to war really later on.
That's right, yes.
As I said, they conduct themselves through word of mouth rather than by the sword. You know,
Are peaceful, non-violent Muslims,
Yeah.
eh? Right.
But are Muslims allowed to be pacifists?
These terms don't mean much. In fact, they're very confusing. Forget about that. Just ask the simple question whether Islam advocates the use of coercion in any form in an attempt to change the views of the world. That is the valid question, isn't it? Clear cut? And my answer is no. Absolutely no.
In relation to war, and
That's a different thing altogether.
yeah, and in relation to loyalty as well to the country that you live in, because like a lot of, let's say, Pakistani Muslims who are born in England,
There is no such possible situation where Islam cannot come into terms with the political belongings and national loyalties. There is no contradiction between, a possible contradiction between the two situations of loyalty to Islam or loyalty to the country. Only rarely such things are possible and conceivable. For instance, according to Islam, you must remain loyal to your own country. And to be loyal to the country is a part of the faith. Hubbul watane min al-iman. These are the very words of the founder of Islam. That love of your country is a part of your faith. So after that, how could you conceive the situation where they should contradict? But in general, we can find such possible situations where one's religion cannot, the loyalty to one's religion cannot be maintained if you succumb to the social pressures around, or sometimes political pressures as well. But they are specific points, specific issues, which have to which have to be discussed, by quoting the case, building the case of such contradictions. Then I can answer that. In principle, the Holy Quran, speaking on the subject, says, you must remain loyal, obey, you must obey Allah, the Prophet, and the ruler, whoever rules you, the government of the time. If you find a situation where they interfere with your religion and pressurize you into changing your religion, then turn to Allah and the Prophet, and then from then on you are released from their obedience. This is the principal education, the teaching in the Quran, right?
Thank you.
Please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Well, so.
In this sermon that I was reading recently, a message of peace and a word of warning by the third Caliph.
Big pardon?
A message of peace and
Yes,
a word
right,
of warning
yes.
by the third Caliph. 1967. It shows the concept of a Third World War before the end of this century, which has been, I think, prophesied by the third Caliph.
Third World War
Mm-hmm.
is mentioned in this booklet, message of peace and word of war.
I understand this. This was referred to earlier by some others. To me, it was just, this was not based, this observation was not based on any revelation or any Quranic prophecy. This was an estimation from studying the events as then prevailing, that the head of the Ahmadiyya community estimated that at this rate maybe there is war by the end of this century. And within 30 years perhaps, he said. But when I reread it after my attention was drawn to this, I did not find any reference to any revelation he had received or any verse of the Holy Quran. So such estimations sometimes go wrong and there is no harm. Is that what you have in mind?
Yes.
If the Third World War is inevitable within this period or not?
Yeah.
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. No, it isn't. It is not inevitable because of other principles which are enunciated in the Holy Quran, that wars which are brought upon by people because of their own follies can be averted if they change and reform. So no such prophecy is inevitable anyway. Even if it had been based on some scriptures and things, still it was avoidable. Right?
So, what I was thinking about was, when this was written in 1967, there was communism in Russia, and there was a lot of tension between America and Russia.
That's right,
But
yes, that's
now,
right.
Communism.
That situation has changed completely. So anything inferred from a prevailing situation, political situation, will no longer be valid if that prevailing situation has changed. Right? Yes, please.
What will happen to us straight after we die?
Beg your pardon?
What will happen to us as soon as we die?
What will happen to us when we die?
Well, it will happen severally to different things to different people. Some, in the sight of Allah, would deserve an eternal peace after death because they behaved and conducted themselves in this world in a manner that they had already achieved their peace with God. So that is the prerequisite of the peace we may expect after death. If we have earned the peace with God while living here on earth, then naturally, of course, we can extend that peace into the eternal, uninterrupted peace after death. But if we are both at war with the people and with God, how can we conceive of a peace after death in the otherworldly existence? So something would happen, of course. But those who have created their hell here on earth themselves would find perhaps no better treatment in the after-death existence. Please.
Assalamu alaikum. I was going to ask a very similar question, having read the Quran, and I've always been somewhat confused about the thing of death. on what exactly happens when you die, because in parts of the Quran it says you will be judged.
Have you discussed it between you, or just so happened?
No. Just right. And also it says in the Quran that all souls will be judged on the day of judgment.
That's right.
So,
But what
is there
would
a
be
sort
the
of
day of
parallel between
judgment?
our death and the day of judgment?
See, there are many things which have to be understood before I can answer you this question. In the question, there are areas which have to be clarified. The concept of the day of judgment. Is it one single day as we know it here, which begins with the dawn of the sun and the setting of the sun? The dawn of the morning or the setting of the sun? No, it cannot be. There is no sun, no revolving earth, nothing in the, hereafter, which would fix the times of the day and separate them from the night's thing and so on. So the day here can only refer to a large period, like in relation to the creation. Not only the Bible but also the Holy Quran speaks of days. But the days here do not mean anything but a large period. So that day could last a billion years maybe, nobody knows. It can't be conceived as a one single moment in time where billions upon billions people will be dealt with and disposed of. So that is a very naive concept born out of our own limited understandings. So that day, number one, is a vast period of time. The Holy Quran also refers to that day as Azim, a colossal day, so almost endless day. But also the beginning of questioning or the bringing to account of the dead when they reappear in the otherworldly existence is not something which will take place in a very, very remote future only. It begins to take place immediately after the death. And we have many references to this in the hadiths, in the traditions of the Holy Prophet, where in some of them it is said that the moment one dies, the angels of reckoning come and they ask about their conduct in brief. So is that a contradiction between, is there a contradiction between this statement and the concept of a day of judgment? This is the issue. We believe none. We believe that as the soul is delivered from the body, it has a vague consciousness, and right from the start it will be made to realize to the soul that you have done wrong, and from then on it will enter a very, very long period of development in which it will ultimately be completely transformed into another existence. According to the founder of the Ahmadiyya community, Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi wasalam, a soul will be born out of the soul, rendering the soul into a body in comparison. So it's all a relative issue of rarity. If things are too refined in comparison to what they were earlier, they become souls and the earlier phases of existence become bodies. So that is the sort of concept which has been presented by Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi wasalam with reference to the Quranic verses. So that day of judgment which you refer to, you find so often mentioned in the Holy Quran, applies to that ultimate phase of development. And that is a sort of rebirth. The Holy Quran explains it scientifically and very clearly by referring to the single birth as it takes place in woman's womb. The Holy Quran says, وَمَا بَعْثُكُمْ وَمَا خَلْقُكُمْ إِلَّا كَنَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. Neither your first birth, that is your evolutionary creation as man, nor your second birth after death would be anything but like your birth as a single person. Now, what does it mean? What message is delivered? How can the birth of a single person be related to what happened before, extending over 1 billion years or so, and what would happen after? This issue has been further explained by another verse which draws our attention to the fact that things are changing within the uterus, and the embryo is continuously given different shapes. So the Holy Quran draws our attention to this fact. It says, study that. How we change you into different shapes and different forms within the short period of 9 months within the uterus of your mothers. Now, these two verses related resolve the problem for us. What the earlier verse I referred to speaks of is the fact that within the development of the embryo from its earliest stages to the point when the child is ready to be delivered, the whole history of evolution is repeated and unrolled. If you know that, then you will know that your rebirth will also go through the same stages and the same processes. See, it's a very clear and very scientific explanation of the previous evolutionary processes which led into man, their repetition, very rapid repetition and unrolling within the uterus, and then we are told that something like this is going to happen when you're reborn. So the message is very clear, isn't it? Thank you. Please.
Yes, I was. Salam alaikum. I was asked to introduce myself. Do you still require me to, or not?
Oh, please do. Most welcome.
I was born and brought up near here, and
born here as well.
Very near here. I was born actually in Kingston on Thames, but brought up in Wimbledon.
Yes.
And became a broad-minded Christian, and worshipping around the world as a professional soldier for 34 years until I retired 5 years ago, gave me an insight into other faiths and their approaches. And since then I've administered a charity, the National Association of Flower Arrangement Societies. But I'd like to raise perhaps a philosophical issue, and that is that the revelations, God's revelations, have always been in times of confrontation and great stress. For example, Moses and the people being removed from Egypt, Jesus with the domination of the Roman Empire and so on, and Muhammad in the 6th, 7th century, times of great stress and confrontation, and that's continued, and continued with confrontation between those three theistic faiths. Yet we live in a multiracial, multi-faith, multicultural world, multi-faith England, South London, and to focus on the here and now, what should we be doing to ensure that we do live in a state of Islam, of peace, which all the major faiths would promote, but in fact have woefully proved to be inadequate, certainly in Bosnia and elsewhere. What should we be doing here and now?
It's a very big question, in fact, covering the whole history of religion and its inception and the interrelationship between religions and so on and so forth, and also applied to the present-day contemporary problems, right? But the answer, I think, shouldn't be very complicated. It's quite simple. Number one, you should remember that if there is one God, as we all believe, the three religions we refer to, then their teachings of the same God could not have been contradictory. It's impossible. So if we find any fundamental contradiction in the teachings of Judaism, Christianity and Islam, then either of the two inferences have to be drawn. Either there is no God, or we have failed to understand the meaning of those so-called contradictory teachings. The Holy Quran has specifically spoken on this subject. It says that there is no contradiction in God and there is no contradiction in religions either. And it says that right from the point when Adam brought the first law to man, up to the point when the Holy Quran was revealed, all prophets have been basically presenting the same teaching, which as its fundamental features has these things as mentioned in the Quran. Number one, submission to the will of Allah, to purify worship to Him alone. Here purifies means that although people worship to Him, but there are other involvements and unfortunate elements which pollute that worship and do not leave it as a single directional worship to God. Ulterior motives and personal loves and preferences and things, they all pollute the atmosphere of the worship. So the Holy Quran specifically says pure, dedicated, undiluted worship to God. That has been the teaching of all religions. And spending in the cause of goodness as prescribed by religions, for the sake of mankind and for the sake of the values, good values of religion, etc. These are the fundamental teachings according to the Quran, which right from the word go, as religions were born, continue to remain in all the following teachings or laws brought by religions. Now the contradictions, according to the Holy Quran, the contradictions are all man-made. People fail to understand certain teachings and created differences which could not be compromised, which could not be reconciled with the teachings of some other religions. They're all wrong. The Holy Quran speaks of an evolutionary process of corruption. It should be called, in fact, it's the other way around than evolution. Devolutionary process may be, but destructive process, deteriorating process of man's views on religion, God, and to himself, in relation to his own fellow beings. The Holy Quran says that all religions who began with the unity of God ultimately got disintegrated into polytheism of some sort. And man-made gods began to take shape and occupy the seats along with God. And it's a very interesting treatment of the whole process by the Quran, and very intriguing in a special way. It says that the same psychological factor which is responsible for the rejection of truth at the outset is responsible for the elevation of the same people rejected earlier to status higher than man. For instance, Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. When he came, he was rejected on the plea by the Jews that you are less than a man. You are not a legitimate member of human society. You are born illegitimately. And yet you claim to be more than a man, as if you are a prophet of God, and your end is as cursed as your beginning is. How can you claim to be above us, superior to us? The basic issue of rejection is acceptance of a superior being among yourselves born within you, who speaks on the authority of God and to whom you must submit. Human society, which already has rebelled against the religious values, and that is why it becomes corrupt, is in no mood to accept another yoke in the name of God. So it rejects. But once, by Allah's decree, people begin to submit to this messenger of God, whom they considered before that inferior and not worthy of even being counted among the human society, once they accept him, then again the same psychological problem of submitting to a man assists them in building an apology for themselves. We believe in this man because he is more than a man. He is not an ordinary person. So they shut the path of the future human appearances by obstructing these passages, obstructing these the passage of human divine representatives, by believing that the previous one to whom we submitted was more than a man. He showed such miracles as no man can show, and he brought such evidence with him as is not possible for ordinary human beings to bring. So whether they call him as God or demigod or not, practically they build barriers between them and the future appearance of a divine messenger. So the same has been done to Hazrat Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They say he came with these miracles and those miracles, and no man on earth who would ever be chosen to represent God again could repeat those miracles, which have been in fact the creation of misunderstanding human beings. They did not concoct these things altogether, but these miracles, as understood today, were born out of the human misunderstandings of certain facts. So this is in a nutshell the Quranic treatment of the issue of similarity, unifying factors, and divergences and differences between the major religions.
May I challenge that, or
yes, do,
add
please.
a question, if I may?
Please.
Yes, I agree with you, what you've said, and you've given a good broad philosophic view, but being a practical person, God's present people on earth are here and now who espouse different views of him, and within the community in South London, hereabouts, there are hundreds of different worshipping communities, all worshipping the same God, yet we have confrontation and suspicion and misunderstanding. How do we resolve, reconcile those?
This is the last part which I have not yet attended. Yes. I finished only the first part of the question, which related to the philosophical understanding of unity and contradiction and everything about it. Now we turn to the practical question of today. Why do we find religions, instead of promoting peace, promoting disorder and practically helping, practically inviting people to hate each other in the name of God? This is the most, unacceptable thing. That can again lead us to only two conclusions. Either these religions as understood today have gone so, off the route, off the path, that nothing of guidance is left in them, and they should be rejected in totality. Or the other conclusion, which I prefer to make, is that the religious leadership has gone wrong, and they unnecessarily and unduly and unrightfully emphasize those parts of religions which differ with others, and do not draw our attention to the commonalities. While despite the theoretical and doctrinal differences, as we have spoken of earlier, there always remains a common platform to every religion, which is the platform of morality, which is the platform of human relationship. And no religion on earth has different views on that. Christianity teaches the same truth, good neighborly relationship, kindness to human beings, to animals, to others, and decency in your relationship, as does Judaism and Christianity and Islam. So also other religions, if you go to the to the area of their moral teachings, you will practically find no divergence. Minor differences, of course, but they are only theoretical. In practice, there are no differences. Now, one can say in Christianity you find the teaching that if somebody strikes you on the right cheek, offer the left one. I agree, but that was a time-related teaching, and it has been practically rejected by the Christians themselves as no longer valid. Practical teaching on the moral issues of differences is a Christian or Western teaching is exactly the same as Islamic. No change whatsoever. So we should draw the attention of the world religious leaders to emphasize the commonality of religious values rather than highlight the differences which relate to the area of doctrines, which relate to the area of understanding of God, which relate to the area of the concept of the hereafter. Even if we continue to differ, what harm there is? First of all, we can never resolve those issues by fighting among ourselves. Nobody has seen God, nobody would see God with his own eyes. So the area, these differences would continue, to a degree. But the areas relating to the human relationship, they're very clear and distinct. And no religion gives you a different teaching, speaks of different teachings, different attitudes towards your fellow human beings. Tell me one religion which says you can usurp the right of others, you can tell lies, you can be cruel, you can abuse your own children and so on and so forth. None whatsoever. So this danger which you refer to is only an ethereal danger which has been turned into real by the distorted attitudes of religious leaders or group leaders of the ethnic groups. As far as Islam is concerned, it says, "Qul ya ahlal kitabe ta'alu ila kalimatin sawa'in bainana wa bainakum." Say, O people of the book, let's join hands, join forces on those things which are common among ourselves, common among us. And why don't we join hands?
Absolutely.
So this is exactly which has been my message throughout my tours and will continue to be. Wherever I visit in the world, I always deliver this message to the people of that part, that for God's sake, don't divide man in the name of God. The only uniting, factor. God is the only uniting factor. And that is the only factor which is used nowadays, unfortunately, for dividing man instead of uniting him. So, understanding the religious values and emphasizing them, we can unite mankind under one God, despite their apparent differences on the concept of God. Right?
Thank you. You echo, in fact, comments made by Bishop Roy Williamson, who is the new bishop of, is now the Bishop of Southwark, but came from Bradford,
Right.
where he established very close links with the Muslim community there in Bradford. And I know, because I'm a member of his Board of Mission and Unity, his concern to establish good interfaith relationships and dialogue. And he, I'm sure, would endorse all that you've said.
Yes. I mean, there is no other way out. Every man in possession of his mental faculty should agree with this.
Indeed.
I mean, there is no alternative. This is the only way out of our problems. To emphasize, you see, Mr. Kenneth Clark, when he was the Minister of Education, he was kind enough once to accept my invitation for him to dine with me before he was the minister, when he was the Minister of Education. And on the issue of religious education in the schools, I requested him kindly not to permit it that dogmatic differences or doctrinal differences to be taught in the schools. Leave them alone to the clergy and the mullahs, etc. Permit and insist on moral teachings of religions in all British educational institutions. And then you will see the healthy effect, not only in bringing about a sort of better understanding between different religions, but also to fight the crime, which is unfortunately is on the increase in your society. And I had the impression that he liked the idea, although I don't know whether it was followed up or not. But this is, I think, the right approach. Yes, please. Anything else? Or?
Well, I think that the local school here, where there are many Muslim children, whilst it is a Church of England school and espouses Church of England values, it takes a very broad religious approach, I know, and I think your children are well educated there.
That's
and
right.
are given a firm moral
I agree, yes.
basis there.
That's
yes.
right. And they have never been discriminated against.
Yeah.
They have always found a welcome atmosphere.
Yes.
They have always been welcomed to retain their cultural values and mix with the society of the other culture freely by exchanging their values. Not forcibly, but as a free interplay. And this is the best thing which can happen. And I am so happy with the attitudes of the schools all around. Thank you.
Well, I will pass that on because I know the headmistress there. My wife was a governor there until recently.
Your wife was?
A governor there.
Oh,
and she
mashallah.
presently teaches at
So
John Paul II School.
I owe my gratitude to her as well. And to you indirectly, of course.
Well, no, I'm just merely a mouthpiece.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank you.
please. Mm-hmm.
I think my next question is probably in relation to the last part in terms of education and religious education.
Okay, anything you like.
Again, I don't know if it's a hypothetical question or a practical question. Maybe you can tell me whether it's worth an answer.
I'll try to help you. Huh?
But with the growing number, there's so many Muslims now in the whole of Britain that I heard of some talk maybe a couple of years ago that they were thinking of asking for an Islamic government to be set up within Britain.
Oh, that's just trash.
You know, I don't know if you can
This
have
is
this.
simply trash.
See, I don't know if it's possible to have this
You see,
two-tier
show me
government.
one Muslim country where there is an Islamic government, where they have succeeded in establishing a truly Islamic government. Having failed in their own countries, they want to implant the Islamic government here in Britain. How stupid! And no government can exist within a government anyway.
But surely Saudi Arabia would claim to be ruled by the Sharia.
Pakistan as well.
Please, which Sharia?
I do not know.
Is it a Shia understanding of Sharia or Sunni understanding, Brelvi, or the Wahhabis, or Shafi, or Hanafi? So, when Sharia, the concept of Sharia has got split into so many sub-concepts, how can you say that this is the Islamic Sharia imposed or exercised in a special country, in a specific country? In fact, their understanding of Sharia is at variance with some other majority sects. Wahhabi sect is only a small sect. So what they are doing is what they think God should have done, and they have understood, and God doesn't seem to have understood that. They have, legislated that into their Sharia laws. So the word Sharia is the only alien which shouldn't have found any place there.
This has got an interesting parallel with the Jewish dogma of the first century and thereabouts, when they were ruled by rigid doctrinal orthodox legislation, which was absolute, and still is for some, I'm afraid.
Yes.
And in medieval Britain, with the church, or medieval Europe, the church ruling supreme against doctrine which was imposed from the Pope.
Yes. You see, we change from time to time. So the Sharia of today may be a different Sharia in Saudi Arabia from the Sharia of tomorrow, because that Sharia is now undergoing changes under American influence. And in things, in certain attitudes, they're softening their approach and turning into milder stances concerning certain crimes in which they found no room for compromise or reconciliation at all. The Sharia, they thought, confined women entirely and totally to the four walls of their houses, is now undergoing changes. And more freedom is granted to the women in Saudi Arabia, and the trend is obvious, they're relaxing. So what right did they have, if the Sharia was the creation of God, to change it under any pressure or under any influence? The Sharia, as made by God, is timeless unless God declares it to have come to an end. As long as that happens, a Sharia is not abrogated by God. It continues and defies interference by man. So when you see changes in Iran regarding the Shia concept of Sharia, the changes in Pakistan legislation regarding certain acts of Sharia and so on, the obvious conclusion you can draw is that they are not talking of Sharia. They are talking of a certain phase in the history of certain Muslim clergy, of their understanding of Sharia. And when you read it in the context of the whole history of Islam, then you find it changing so rapidly and so drastically sometimes that it's hard to have any faith in any Sharia at all left. I draw your attention to the Christian experience of Inquisition days. You see, that was done in the name of Christ, Jesus, peace.
Terrible.
You see, no injustice could be done to Christ bigger than this. Even crucifixion was small in comparison to this, because the very purpose and message of crucifixion was demolished and annihilated and destroyed utterly by the attitude of the governments of Ferdinand and Isabella towards first the Muslims, then to the Jews, then to the Christians themselves. So there are just phases in history. What is the Sharia law? This is a different thing altogether. This is the question which I think we should have been addressed properly. According to me, no Sharia whatsoever can shall we say, impose a law upon a people which do not agree with that law to have a divine origin. If they do, will that be just? Will that be in accordance with the principle of la ikraha fi deen, there is no question in religion? The answer is no. Whatever the name of the religion, if a religion attempts to impose its own laws upon such people as disagree with that religion as a divine religion at all, and punish them for disagreement, then what justice is left in the matters of divine laws anyway? Nothing whatsoever. Then it means we invite the Jews to impose the Jewish law, not only on the Jewish people in Israel, but also on the Muslims and Christians, etc. And we invite Britain and other European Christian governments to impose the laws of Christianity on all others. And we also invite Hindus to impose the laws of Manusamarthi in India, equally to all, and to Buddhists as well, and to all religions. What sort of political, political complexion would emerge from that?
You couldn't do it in the 20th century. Certainly not with television and your worldwide broadcast.
You could not do it in any century, in fact. It's not possible.
Not since communication was developed.
What I mean to say is, it has not been done practically in any century by the whole world. As you said, there was no communication anyway. But in fact, in different religions have passed through different phases. And they have not always coincided in their stiff attitudes to mankind as such. There are phases in Christianity, while in Islam in those days there was no such attitude of non-tolerance, because this can be proved from the history of Spain itself. The Islamic government of the period was so broad-minded that it gave complete freedom to the Christians, to the Jews, to all others to practice their faith as they pleased and do whatever they like, as long as they do not break the law of the land, which was a different thing altogether. So that's what I'm saying. The religious ups and downs, or we move in waves, of course. Sometimes religion is more pragmatic, sometimes it's more idealistic and rigid. So they have never been coinciding with each other in the history of religions. These ups and downs, I mean. Sometimes Islam seems to be very broad-minded and all-embracing, and sometimes Christianity takes this attitude like it is doing just now, while Islam has turned to that period when Christianity was rigid. So as a whole, I mean, when you study the history in the co-relationship of events taking place in one religious area and another religious area, then you begin to realize that these differences are not born out of religions. They are born out of attitudes of human beings. They are not God-made differences. Because religions are religions as revealed by God. Nobody can interfere with them. So if they have been so misinterpreted at times that they give a completely different outlook to the attitudes of the people who believe in them, and then turn the tables the other way around and completely transform the attitudes of the same people who adhere to the same religion at a different time. What can you infer from that? What logic is there in this? You see, if the religions are God-made anyway, they can't change like this. They can't fluctuate according to the weathers and climates. But in fact, if you study the history of man, what is at the root cause of all this is the political usurpation and exploitation of religions. Apparently, the fault lies with the religious leadership. It does, of course, but only in the way that they subjugated to the political authority and wanted to please the political authority and change religions according to their wishes, or at least change the interpretation of the religions according to the wishes of the political powers of the period. This has always been the reason why religions seem to have completely different behaviors at different times. Look at Islamic history. Look at the history of particularly Abbasides. At one time, one of the Abbasid kings, or Khalifa as they are referred to, favored the view of those who believed that the Quran was created by God. And because those who held this view could not tolerate the opposite view that the Quran was not created, they encouraged the Khalifa, and Khalifa agreed with them because this was his own view, that these people should be persecuted, even killed, murdered, hanged, and a lot of violence was committed in the name of the issue of creation of the Quran. It so happened that the same Khalifa changed his view on this issue and made a volte-face, change in his attitude towards the creation of the Quran. He said Quran was not created. And then he started prosecuting all those who believed that the Quran had been created, like he himself had believed earlier. And it so happened that the graves of the dead people were opened up again, and they were taken out and hanged on the crossroads to deliver the message to the mankind, the whole living people, that if we can do this to the dead, what we'll do to you, you should understand better. So where is religion, participating in that at all? In fact, it's only a means of exploitation. And it is the political authorities who have always found their way into the religious clergy. They have always influenced the religious clergy to have the edicts as they like, sort of extorted from them. On the other hand, sometimes it is the other way around, but occasionally, when the religious clergy is once given this free hand, then ultimately they become too powerful. You see, the jinn released from the lamp of Aladdin, ultimately captures him and destroys him. So that also happens.
That's a nice analogy.
Next.
My next question is concerning the Jewish community mainly. In Judaism, the Jews have always stated that they were, or they are, the chosen people of God.
Yes.
Yet throughout their history, they have always faced great persecution.
Correct.
Does this show that God does no longer favour them, or that Ahmadiyya is uniting all the faiths?
You see, God favors people, has been favoring people throughout the history of mankind, but not through being partial to them. They're two different things altogether. God has been favoring people because of some basic characters, excellent characters which they possessed or which God had granted them. As long as they retained those excellent characters and values, they remained the favorites of God. And when they started to deviate from them, then they no longer were the favorite ones. In fact, the opposite came true. Because if the one you favor so much has completely changed and got transformed into a different sort of entity, which is so loathsome, all the best has been bartered with the worst that man can possess, then your wrath is in proportion greater than it would be in case of other people who never were favored by you. This is a human psychological experience, and to understand God, human psyche is the best reference. This is the only meaning of the scriptural observations, both by the New Testament and the Quran, that God has made man after him in his own character. It doesn't mean that man shares all the infinite values and characters of God. It means that the nature of man is the only reference through which you can reach the understanding of God. Because nature is true. If it is changed and perverted, that's a different story. But if you delve deeper into yourself, you can find the truth. This principle has been sometimes misapplied, for instance, by those religions which thought that all the truth lies within yourself and there is no outside truth. So they denied the existence of God and said only you have to delve deeper into yourself and there you will find the truth. But there you find the truth to reach the external truth. This they forgot or misunderstood. So that is why there are born some religions who originally we believe were God-made, but ultimately drifted to a sort of philosophy of wisdom, human wisdom, where they believed that the human wisdom was sufficient to take you into yourself, and the internal journey in depth in yourself, in your own universe, will help you to reach the ultimate universal truth. It is the same thing said in a different way, in fact. Like the Quran says, like the New Testament says, God has made man after himself. So if you understand your own psychic reactions purely and truly, not under some complexes, then this rule will apply. So in answer to this, your question, although I have rather expanded it over much, but I wanted to convince you that this inference is drawn on, on some solid study of human nature and religion, that the Jews, if they have become the recipients of Allah's wrath, have not been done any injustice at all. With reference to the values which were inculcated in them through religious teachings, when they started deviating from them, and particularly reached the summit of this deviation at the time of Jesus Christ, and became stone-hearted, so much so that they insisted on the crucifixion of the most innocent man, the most innocent living man at that period. How could they still be the hot favorites of Allah? The opposite had to be true. So this is why the Holy Quran speaks of them both as the favorites as well as the most unfavored nation. At places it says, فَضَّلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى الْعَالَمِينَ. We chose them above the whole mankind, and we endeared them as we had endeared no other people on earth in that period. Then it says, because they did this, because they did that, then so we made them as the recipients of Allah's wrath like no other people had been done before. Right? क्यों जी? अच्छा जी, हमने एग्जैक्ट वक्त पे शुरू किया था 12 बजे ना 11 बजे?
चंद मिनट लेट, लेकिन
अच्छा, तो फिर चंद मिनट रहते हैं अभी हैं?
ये घड़ी में थोड़ा सा
हाँ, मेरी घड़ी पे चंद मिनट ऊपर हो गए हैं, ठीक है. All right, we take leave of you. Although the time has passed so quickly, but whatever it was, I enjoyed sitting with you, and it was such sheer intellectual delight to remain with you and discuss these things. You know, when there is no prejudices to mar the discussion, and there is no, what they say, you know, apart from prejudices, sometimes some people are so rigid in their attitudes that they just won't understand. Discussions with such people, you know, sometimes a bit
sterile, they lead nowhere.
Yes, and becomes disturbing and leaves you very uncomfortable. But if you are in discussion with groups like with free attitudes and at liberty to decide according to the dictates of the reason, then such discussions are always very pleasant. And this is what I said about this. Thank you very much.